If you're planning to downsize in the next few years, you've probably heard one warning more than any other. Stamp duty is the enemy. A one-off bill of $50,000, sometimes more, just for the right to move 15 minutes down the road into something smaller. That's the story most people get told. But something has quietly flipped in how state governments look at your home, and it changes the math for anyone in the 55 to 65 age bracket who's thinking about selling. While everyone is still complaining about that upfront stamp duty bill, a different kind of tax is being tested in parts of the country. Not a one-off payment, an annual land tax that keeps arriving every single year you own the place, whether you've moved house or not. Run the numbers on a modest $5,000 a year land tax, growing at 4% a year in line with rising property values, and over a 20-year retirement, it adds up to close to $148,000. That's roughly 3 times what most people pay in stamp duty once, as a single hit. Avoiding stamp duty sounds like a win. For someone still earning a wage, an annual land tax is just another bill covered out of the pay packet. Once you're living off super and a part pension, a bill that shows up every year, regardless of whether your income has changed, works differently. I want to show you the exact break-even year, the point where this newer forever tax stops looking like the smart choice and starts working against you. And I want to show you how it quietly interacts with your pension in a way most retirees never see coming until the bill lands. If you're trying to protect the equity you've built in your home from being worn down by shifting tax rules, hit subscribe. This channel tracks exactly these kinds of changes for Australians in the 55 to 65 window. Picture a $5,000 a year land tax bill, nothing dramatic on its own. But let it grow at just 4% a year, roughly in line with property values, and by year 20, you've handed over close to $148,890 in total. Compare that to a stamp duty bill of $50,000 paid once, and you can see why the forever tax costs nearly 3 times as much over a full retirement. To understand why this keeps happening, it helps to separate 2 different kinds of tax. Stamp duty is a tax on movement. You pay it once, at the moment you buy. Land tax is a tax on holding. It turns up every year for as long as you own the property, whether you move again or not. For state governments, that difference matters. Stamp duty income is lumpy. It depends on how many people happen to sell in any given year, and that number swings with interest rates and confidence. Land tax is smooth. It arrives every year, regardless of how the property market is behaving, which makes it a far more predictable source of revenue for a state budget. That's part of why the Australian Capital Territory started phasing out stamp duty in favour of land tax back in 2012 on a 20-year transition plan. We're now well past the halfway mark of that experiment, heading toward its final stages, and other states have been watching the results closely. Victoria has already shifted commercial and industrial land onto this same holding tax model, moving away from stamp duty for those properties from the middle of 2024. Treasury discussions in 2026 have floated similar ideas for ordinary homeowners, which is exactly why this matters now, not as some future hypothetical. For someone still working, an annual land tax bill is a bit like a council rates notice, annoying, but covered out of a regular pay packet. For a retiree living off super and a part pension, it behaves differently. The bill doesn't ask whether your income has changed this year. It turns up regardless, like a fee you have to keep paying just to stay in a home you already own outright. I've watched people do the sums on stamp duty down to the dollar, then wave off the annual land tax bill as small change. It rarely stays small change. A $5,000 bill growing at 4% a year roughly doubles in size, across 18 years, quietly, while nothing else about the house has changed. But the annual bill isn't the only cost hiding in this picture. There's a second hit that catches people off guard, one that some financial planners miss when they're comparing stamp duty against land tax side by side. It shows up not in the tax itself, but in what happens to your pension once you start paying it. The way most people compare these two taxes misses the point entirely. It's not really about how much tax you pay in total. It's about when you pay it and what that timing does to your pension along the way. Take a couple with a $5,000 a year land tax bill on their downsized home. On paper, that's simple. $5,000 a year indexed roughly with the value of the property. But the real cost rarely stops there. Your family home is exempt from the pension assets test, so the value of the house itself doesn't touch that side of the ledger. The problem is the cash. If a couple needs to draw down extra savings or investments each year to cover that tax bill, and that drawdown pushes their assessable income over a threshold, the pension can start tapering in response. It's not the tax office reaching into your pocket a second time. It's Centrelink's income test reacting to the fact that your cash reserves are moving. In one real scenario worth walking through, a couple facing that $5,000 land tax bill also trips an income threshold by drawing down extra savings to cover it. Their pension gets reduced by roughly $2,250 a year as a result. Add that to the tax itself, and the true annual hit is closer to $7,250, not $5,000. ASFA's most recent figures put the yearly budget for a comfortable retirement for a couple at around $77,375. An extra $7,250 disappearing every year in tax and reduced pension payments is close to a tenth of that entire budget. Gone before a single dollar has been spent on the retirement you actually planned. That's the part standard advice tends to skip over. I used to argue that stamp duty was the bigger barrier to downsizing, full stop. I was wrong, or at least only half right. I didn't account for the fact that land tax doesn't retire when you do. It keeps asking every year, long after the wage that used to cover it has stopped. This isn't a story about anyone being careless with money. A couple can do everything right, budget carefully, plan their drawdown sensibly, and still get caught by a mechanism that has nothing to do with how well they've managed their retirement. The tax system simply wasn't built with a fixed income in mind. Think about the last few bills you've had to plan around all at once. A council rates notice, an electricity bill that crept up again, car re-due due for renewal. Add an extra $5,000 to $7,250 a year sitting alongside all of that permanently, and you start to see why timing matters more than the total figure on a spreadsheet. Ask yourself honestly, if your pension dropped by a couple of $1,000s next year because of a bill you hadn't budgeted for, would you notice straight away? Or would it just quietly eat into the trips and small comforts you'd planned for retirement? So, if an annual tax can quietly cost more than a one-off bill and drag your pension down with it, does that mean everyone should just pay the $50,000 stamp duty and be done with it? Not necessarily. Before you decide, there's a break-even year you need to work out first, one that depends entirely on how long you plan to stay put. Once you understand that timing matters more than the total, the next question is practical. At what point does the annual land tax actually cost more than paying stamp duty up front? Call it the 10-year rule. Start simple. A stamp duty bill of $50,000 up front, against an annual land tax starting at $4,000. Divide one by the other and you get 12.5 years. On that basic maths alone, if you plan to stay in the home for more than about 12.5 years, the land tax model works out more expensive. But land tax doesn't sit still. Factor in a 4% annual increase in land value and the tax that comes with it, and the picture shifts. Add up the growing annual bill year by year rather than treating it as a flat $4,000 forever, and the break-even point moves earlier to somewhere around 10 to 11 years, not 12 and a half. That's the number that actually matters for your decision. If you're planning to stay in a downsized home for more than about 10 years, paying the stamp duty upfront tends to work out as the cheap path over time, even though it hurts more on the day you sign the contract. If you think you'll move again within around 5 years, perhaps into aged care, or to be closer to family, the land tax model can work out lighter on your finances. A 1 or 2 year difference either side of that line can swing the outcome by tens of thousands of dollars over a full retirement, which is exactly why guessing your moving timeline isn't good enough here. It's worth being honest with yourself about how long you actually expect to stay, rather than assuming you'll move again soon just because that's what you've done in the past. It's worth sitting with that 10-year figure for a moment, because most people's gut instinct runs the other way. They assume the visible upfront cost is always the one to avoid, when it's often the drawn-out, invisible one that ends up costing more. This is the calculation that standard advice skips. Most guides treat stamp duty as simply the expensive option and land tax as the more modern, fairer alternative, without ever asking how long you intend to actually live in the place. For someone in their late 50s or 60s, that number, how many years you expect to stay, matters more than almost anything else in this decision. But there's a question that breaks this whole calculation if you don't plan for it. What happens to your land tax bill if the property market falls? Does the bill fall with it? For a lot of retirees, the answer is a wake-up call. Here's the scenario that trips people up even more than the growth numbers. Picture a downturn similar to the global financial crisis of 2008, where property values across a state fall by around 15%. The natural assumption is that your land tax bill should fall by roughly the same amount. Values are down, so the tax based on those values should be down too. That's not how most of these systems actually work. State governments often calculate land tax using an average of the last 2 or 3 years of valuations, not the current year alone. That means even if your home's value drops today, your tax bill can keep climbing for another year or two, based on growth that already happened before the downturn hit. Look back at 2008 and 2009. Property turnover slowed sharply as buyers and sellers sat on their hands. But in several states, land tax revenue held up far better than you'd expect from a market that quiet precisely because valuations lagged the market by a year or more. For a retiree, that lag is the dangerous part. You can be sitting on a property that's worth less than it was 12 months ago, while still receiving a tax bill calculated as if the good years never ended. This is also why relying purely on this year's land value to judge next year's tax bill is a mistake worth avoiding. The number on this year's notice tells you what already happened, not what's coming. Ask yourself what your household would do if that bill arrived the same size as last year, even though your home's value on paper had just dropped. Would you have breathing room, or would you be forced into a decision under pressure? The way around this isn't complicated, but it does take planning ahead of time. Keep a dedicated buffer, sitting in an offset account or a conservative part of your super, covering at least 3 years of land tax at current levels. That way, a market dip doesn't force you into selling the family home in a hurry just to cover a bill that was calculated on numbers from before the downturn. There's a reason so many people instinctively dislike stamp duty more than land tax, even when the math says land tax can cost more over time. It comes down to a well-documented bias called loss aversion. Losing $50,000 in one hit feels like a punch to the gut. It's visible, it's immediate, and it feels almost like a penalty for daring to move house. An extra $417 a month in land tax feels like nothing by comparison, even when it adds up to far more over 20 years. It's completely normal to want to avoid that big upfront hit. It feels like it's coming straight out of your pocket in one go. That single moment of signing the contract carries a weight far out of proportion to its true financial size, while the ongoing bill, spread thin across 52 weeks a year, barely registers as a decision at all. But a slow monthly leak is exactly the kind of cost that's easy to stop noticing, not because anyone is trying to catch you out, but because that's simply how most people naturally think about money. Try shifting how you look at it. Instead of treating your home as a fixed asset that sits there quietly, treat the ongoing land tax as a regular cost of living in it, similar to a body corporate fee, except this one goes to the state government rather than a strata manager. If that fee, added up over the years, is bigger than what you'd spend on the travel, or the grandkids, or the small comforts you actually planned your retirement around, it's worth knowing that before you sign anything, not after. That's not a reason to panic about either option. It's a reason to look past the size of the number on the day you sign and pay attention to how it behaves every year after. Here's the short version. Stamp duty is a one-off hurdle, painful once, and then finished. Land tax is a permanent headwind, smaller on the surface but present every single year you own the place. Work out roughly how long you plan to stay in your next home, apply the 10-year rule, and you'll know which option actually costs less for your situation. That's really the whole decision. Not which tax sounds fairer in theory, but which one fits how long you actually plan to stay somewhere. Get that one estimate right, and the rest of the maths mostly takes care of itself. You've spent close to 40 years building equity in a piece of Australia. Don't let a change in what a tax is called talk you into giving that equity back one annual payment at a time. Keep an eye on how these thresholds and tax settings shift each year, because they rarely stay still for long, and the states are still adjusting how they handle this exact trade-off. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of the next round of changes before they land in your letterbox. Retirement isn't about how much you have, it's about how much you keep.